Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we are diving into a story that speaks to anyone who has ever felt broken, abandoned, or completely lost. You see, life has a way of bringing us to our knees. Sometimes it's through heartbreak, sometimes through failure, and other times through pain so deep we don't even have words for it. And maybe you've been there, alone in your room, staring at the ceiling, asking God, why me? Why now? Why does it hurt so much? If you've ever whispered those questions through tears, this story is for you, because when you feel broken, God can still deliver you. The story begins with a young man named Daniel. On the outside, he looked fine. He smiled at his co-workers, laughed with his friends, and even sat in church on Sundays. But inside, he was carrying a storm. His life had collapsed in ways he never expected. The job he thought was secure had slipped through his fingers. The relationship he had built his future around was gone. And with every loss, he felt more worthless, more invisible, more broken. Every night Daniel would lie awake, scrolling through his phone, wondering why his prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling. He started to believe maybe God had forgotten him. Maybe he wasn't good enough. Maybe his mistakes had disqualified him from God's love and blessings. That thought grew heavier and heavier until it nearly crushed his spirit. But here's the thing about God. He often shows up in the moments we least expect. Deliverance doesn't always come wrapped in the package we prayed for. Sometimes it comes through a stranger's words, through an unexpected door, or through a hardship that forces us to see life differently. Daniel didn't know it yet, but God was already working behind the scenes. Even in his brokenness, even in his doubt, God was setting the stage for a breakthrough. One evening, when Daniel felt at his lowest, he went for a walk just to clear his head. He found himself sitting on an old park bench, watching the sun set behind the trees. And that's when he noticed an older man sitting at the other end of the bench. The man looked ordinary. Nothing about him stood out. But when he turned to Daniel and spoke, his words cut through the silence like a key, unlocking a locked door. "You look heavy, son," the man said gently. "But don't forget, broken doesn't mean finished. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in." Daniel froze. He didn't know this man. He had never seen him before. But something about those words stirred his heart in a way he hadn't felt in months. It was like God himself had whispered through a stranger, reminding him that deliverance was still possible, that his story wasn't over. But what happened next would change Daniel's life forever, because that simple encounter was only the beginning, and the path God would lead him on from that moment was something Daniel never could have imagined. Daniel sat on that old bench long after the sun had slipped behind the trees, his mind replaying the stranger's words over and over. Broken doesn't mean finished. The sentence echoed in his heart like a drumbeat he couldn't ignore. He wanted to ask the man more, to understand why those words struck so deeply, but when he turned to speak, the man was gone. No footsteps, no trace, just an empty space on the bench where he had been. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. For days after that encounter, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than coincidence. He kept thinking about how hopeless he had felt just moments before, and how suddenly, through a stranger, he had been given a flicker of hope. It was confusing. Part of him wanted to believe it was God speaking to him, that this was a sign of deliverance. But another part of him doubted. Maybe it was just his mind trying to hold on to something, anything, in the middle of all his pain. Daniel's past was filled with dreams that once seemed so certain. He had grown up believing that if you worked hard, prayed faithfully, and stayed on the right path, life would reward you, and for a while it did. He landed a job he was proud of, surrounded himself with friends, and found someone he thought would stand by him forever. But one by one, those pieces fell apart. First came the layoff, then the bills piling up, then the betrayal from someone he trusted most. With each loss, Daniel felt like a piece of himself had been stripped away. And the more broken he felt, the harder it became to believe God could still use him. The nights were the worst. Silence filled the room, but inside his mind was loud with questions. Why would God allow this? Why didn't he stop it? Where was he when I needed him most? The weight of those doubts pressed down until Daniel sometimes wondered if he'd ever feel whole again. But then, just as the darkness felt suffocating, the memory of that stranger's voice would return, reminding him of something deeper. It was as if God had placed a seed in his heart that night. A seed of faith, fragile and small, but alive. Daniel didn't know what it would grow into. He didn't know if he was ready to trust again. But something told him the story wasn't finished. And as the days moved forward, he would begin to see signs, subtle but undeniable, that his brokenness was not the end, but the beginning of something he never expected. Yet with every sign came a new question, a new layer of mystery. And Daniel was about to discover that the path to healing would not be smooth or easy, but filled with moments that would test everything he believed about himself, about faith, and about God's power to deliver. The days that followed seemed ordinary on the surface, but inside Daniel's life, a storm kept growing. He went through the motions, sending out resumes, attending interviews, forcing himself to smile when friends checked in. But beneath it all, he felt torn between hope and despair. That brief encounter on the bench had left him with questions that wouldn't let go. Was it God trying to reach him? Or was it just a fleeting moment of comfort that meant nothing? The main conflict wasn't only about losing a job or a relationship. It was deeper than that. Daniel felt caught between two voices, one telling him he was finished, too broken for God to care, and another whispering that deliverance was still possible. The tension between doubt and faith pulled at him every single day. He knew how easy it would be to give up, to drown his pain in distractions, yet something inside kept pushing him to hold on a little longer. Meanwhile, a subplot began unfolding at home. Daniel's younger sister, Emily, noticed the heaviness in his eyes and tried to reach out. She would leave little notes on the kitchen table, reminding him of Bible verses about God's strength in weakness. At first, Daniel brushed them off, but late at night he found himself reading them over and over. They planted small reminders that maybe brokenness could be the soil for something new. Yet even as Emily tried to encourage him, another perspective crept in. His old friend, Marcus, called one evening and told Daniel bluntly to stop relying on faith. "God's not going to fix this for you," Marcus said. "You've got to do it all on your own." The words stung, and they left Daniel even more conflicted. Whose voice should he believe? The pull of despair was strong, but so was the quiet whisper of hope. And just when Daniel thought things couldn't get more complicated, something unexpected happened that pushed the conflict to a breaking point. One night, after another rejection email and a heated argument with Marcus still echoing in his head, Daniel found himself walking back to that same park where he had first met the stranger. The air was heavy, the sky thick with clouds, and it felt like even the world around him was carrying his weight. He sat on the same bench, staring into the shadows, desperate for some kind of sign. The silence pressed in, and for the first time, he admitted to himself how close he was to giving up. But as he sat there, he noticed movement near the trees. A figure stepped out slowly, almost hidden by the darkness. Daniel's heart began to race. His mind leapt back to that night when the stranger's words had pierced his soul. Could it be him again? Or was this something else entirely? His pulse quickened, fear and hope mixing until he couldn't tell them apart. The figure drew closer, and Daniel felt every muscle tense. The weight of all his doubts, his questions, his prayers seemed to rest on this moment. He whispered under his breath, "God, if you're real, if you still care, show me." The words cracked in the night air, fragile but desperate. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. Don't forget, brokenness can be the place where God does his best work. The timing sent chills down his spine. He looked back toward the figure, now only a few steps away. His chest tightened, his thoughts racing between fear of what was coming and the desperate hope that maybe this was the turning point. Everything he had wrestled with, faith, doubt, deliverance, seemed to collide in this one moment. And then, just as the figure stepped into the dim glow of the park light, Daniel realized it wasn't the stranger from before. It was Marcus. His expression was serious, almost urgent, and the sight of him there at that exact moment sent a shock through Daniel's chest. Marcus wasn't someone who believed in signs or divine timing, yet here he was, walking straight toward him in the same place where Daniel had been searching for answers. "Man, what are you doing out here?" Marcus asked, his voice low but sharp. "I've been calling you. You didn't answer." Daniel's phone was still buzzing in his pocket from Emily's message. He hadn't even noticed Marcus's missed calls. His thoughts tangled. Was this coincidence, or was this another twist in a story God was weaving? Marcus sat down next to him, the weight of his presence pulling Daniel deeper into conflict. Marcus leaned in. "Listen, you need to stop chasing after hope that's not coming. You're wasting your time waiting for God to deliver you. Nobody's going to hand you a way out. You've got to fight for yourself." The words cut deep, because part of Daniel agreed. The brokenness he felt made him doubt God's deliverance more than ever. But then he thought about Emily's text, arriving at the exact moment he had whispered that desperate prayer. Was that really an accident? Or was it God's way of reminding him that hope was closer than he thought? The clash of voices in his life, Emily's faith-filled encouragement, Marcus's hardened realism, and the haunting memory of the stranger's words, was now louder than ever. Daniel felt like he was standing at a crossroads, both paths demanding his choice, neither one offering peace. And then Marcus dropped a revelation that made Daniel's heart pound even harder. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said, his eyes locked on Daniel's. "What happened to your job? It wasn't just bad luck. Someone you trusted had a hand in it. Someone you wouldn't expect." Daniel's breath caught. His mind began racing, trying to piece together what Marcus meant. Could betrayal have gone deeper than he ever imagined? The thought that someone close to him had contributed to his downfall sent a wave of anger and confusion crashing over him. He gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. Every unanswered question, every sleepless night, every cry for deliverance now swirled into a storm. The stakes had shifted. The battle wasn't just about finding hope in his brokenness. It was about uncovering truth, facing betrayal, and deciding whether to lean on God or give in to bitterness. And as Marcus leaned closer to reveal the name of the person behind it all, Daniel braced himself, knowing that whatever he heard next could break him completely, or push him toward the very deliverance he had been desperate to find. Daniel's chest tightened as Marcus finally spoke the name. It was someone Daniel never would have imagined. His former mentor at work, the very person who had promised to look out for him. The man he had trusted most had quietly pulled strings that cost him his job. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Betrayal wasn't just a theory anymore. It was real, personal, and it burned. Anger surged through Daniel. His mind spun with thoughts of revenge, of confronting his mentor, of making him pay for what he had done. For a moment, Marcus's voice seemed convincing. "You can't trust anyone but yourself. You've got to fight back." And Daniel almost believed it. Almost. But then he remembered Emily's message, the stranger's words on the bench, and the countless nights he had whispered to God, begging for deliverance. Something inside him shifted. Instead of rage consuming him, a deep calm began to rise. It wasn't weakness. It was strength he hadn't felt before. He realized that holding on to anger would only keep him broken, but letting God handle the weight could set him free. His heart pounded as he looked Marcus in the eye and said, "I won't let bitterness own me. God's not finished with me yet." The words startled Marcus. He shook his head, unable to understand how Daniel could still hold on to faith in the middle of betrayal. But Daniel knew this was the moment of decision. The cracks in his life hadn't destroyed him. They had made space for God's light to break through. In that instant, he felt a release, as if chains that had bound him for months finally fell away. Deliverance had come, not in the form of getting his job back or fixing the past, but in freedom from the weight of brokenness. And just when Daniel thought the storm had calmed, a final twist emerged. As he stood to leave, his phone buzzed again, this time with an email. It was from a company he had applied to weeks earlier, one he thought had forgotten about him. They wanted him to come in for an interview. The timing was too precise to ignore. Daniel stared at the screen, his hands trembling. He had chosen faith over bitterness, and now, in the very moment of surrender, a new door had opened. The story of his brokenness wasn't ending. It was only beginning. But this time, he knew he wouldn't be walking into the unknown alone. God was with him, and that truth changed everything. The days that followed felt different for Daniel. He still carried the scars of what had happened, but they no longer defined him. The betrayal at work hurt, yet he no longer let it control his future. When he walked into that interview, he didn't feel like a desperate man begging for a chance. He felt like someone who had already been delivered. Someone who knew his worth came from God, not from people's approval. Emily noticed the change almost immediately. The heaviness in her brother's eyes had lifted, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't seen in a long time. Her notes and prayers had been small seeds, but now she was watching them bloom. "I knew God wasn't done with you," she whispered one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. Daniel simply smiled, grateful for her faith that had carried him through when his own had been weak. Marcus, on the other hand, struggled to understand. He couldn't wrap his mind around how Daniel could forgive and move forward without demanding payback. Yet even he couldn't deny the peace Daniel carried. Their friendship shifted, no longer built on bitterness or doubt, but on the hope that maybe Marcus, too, could one day see what Daniel had discovered. As for the stranger on the bench, Daniel never saw him again. Sometimes he wondered if it had been an angel, or maybe just a kind soul at the right place and time. Either way, those words, "broken doesn't mean finished," had become a truth Daniel lived by. They reminded him daily that even in weakness, God's strength could shine through. In the end, deliverance didn't look like getting everything back exactly the way it was before. It looked like freedom from despair, courage to face tomorrow, and the faith to believe that God was still writing his story. The job interview opened a new chapter, but the deeper gift was learning that brokenness wasn't the end. It was the doorway to healing, hope, and transformation. And so Daniel's journey leaves us with this. When you feel broken, remember that God has not abandoned you. The cracks in your life are not proof of failure, but opportunities for His light to break through. Deliverance may not come how or when you expect, but it will come. And when it does, you'll see that your story, just like Daniel's, was never over. It was only unfolding into something greater.